Hello, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I've always wanted to say that. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to say it at some point else in the future and hopefully in front of a larger audience so I can actually have an opportunity to provide one of these in person. But I'm going to speak today on the significance of personal connection and relationships, particularly with building relationships with your learners and their importance in the learning process. Some best practices and arguments for knowing your students. I'd like to start with a little bit of a personal story based on some of the reading that I did personally. In my opinion, and in my advice that I provide to all of my student teachers, and especially to the intern that I'm teaching and helping with this year, you really need to focus on primarily developing some sort of a relationship with the students that you have. Relationships are first. As I heard in an early meeting that I went to, a professional development, if you can reach them, you can teach them. And I really believe in this mindset. And I always tell them that it's maybe not the right word for it, but you got to have a gimmick if you're going to be teaching the kids that you have or any learners that you have in your classroom. And it could be anything. For me, it's jokes. I know that a lot of the students that I have come into my classroom are not as interested in world history as I am, which I don't understand because nothing's more interesting than Europeans. But one of the best ways that I try to get their involvement into my class is by telling them a joke, entertaining them, and at least getting that buy-in before I start teaching them about the content they need to know. For instance, I always open class with a joke. Yesterday's was in Germany, they even have a sausage made out of other sausages. It's known as the worst of the worst. And then today's was, do you know why there are no skeleton comedians? It's because they don't have a funny bone in their body, apart from the humorous. The silence is about what I experience in my class every day, but it is something that I try to do just to try to bring them in a little bit more. Building off of that, I have a very personal story about one of the students that I connected with the best, and I believe was a perfect piece of evidence for my advice on relationships. And her name was Gabby. I met Gabby in my second year at Enterprise High School. That's the school I teach at when I was teaching modern world history to college prep sophomores, which is our basic level class. We have AP and we have CP at our school, also honors, but we don't have any honors social science classes. So I teach CP modern world history and AP European history. And Gabby, we'll call her Gabby, that's not her real name, entered my class disinterested. She was not interested in social science. She had failed her geography class. She was not engaged or really ready to go with anything having to do with school or even remotely social science itself. And so she was not really checked in with me. I was able to build a relationship with Gabby by consistently telling jokes in my class, and she would tell them back. And I'd always open the floor like, okay, who's got one today? And they'd tell me a joke. I checked in with her sports, with the things that she wanted to accomplish at the school, both athletically and academically. And I was even able to engage her in my subject matter by asking my students very early on. It's one of the first questions I ask them when they walk in my room. What's your favorite piece of television media? So like a TV show, a movie, anything like that. And it allows me to learn a little bit more about them and try to connect them to something that I'm teaching in my class. I learned her favorite thing was Game of Thrones. That was my way in. I was able to constantly remind her, hey, Gabby, remember this really great scene from Game of Thrones? That's actually influenced by this concept I'm going to be teaching about in world history today. And she was fascinated with it and involved and engaged. And from that point on and on through the rest of her time at Enterprise, history was her favorite subject. And when she graduated, last year actually, she informed me on graduation day that she intended to go get her teaching credential in history, which for me, again, like it emphasizes the importance that relationships have when it comes to education and how significant they are for the learning process. So relationships are the key to any important learning process. Molbike's research on inclusive teaching strategies focuses on 4 distinctive dimensions that provide the student more intrinsic motivation and understanding of their education and progress in a given subject. They emphasize the 4 dimensions within effective inclusion strategies, such as the framing dimension. Now let me move my face over here really quickly. There, that'll be a little bit better. Okay, such as the framing dimension, wherein the teacher establishes predictable and comfortable routines for clarity and focus in the classroom. A relational dimension, as the teacher utilizes communication with both their students and other actors in the school atmosphere, like other teachers or parents or paraprofessionals or guides, tutors, other students, in fact. The didactic dimension, wherein the teacher's own competence within their own field of learning. So, for instance, my expertise as a written and published historian comes into play in my room a lot. And the organizational dimension that operates on a school-wide level through school culture. For instance, at my school, we emphasize something called we, not me, wherein your relationship to both your learning and the people around you is really significant for developing a very positive learning atmosphere at our high school. Another really key part of setting up relationships is setting expectations for them between the teacher and the student regularly and early. The students know what to do in the classroom. The teacher is more, or they are more comfortable, and allows the teacher to be more comfortable as well. If you set your expectations very early on, both in an online setting or a traditional setting, you're able to provide a much more stable learning environment. And Jeffrey Martin even actually pointed out that listing expectations for assignments and classroom requirements, it's normal, like handing them a syllabus and saying, read it, you'll know what to do. But it's even better if you yourself walk them through it, model it, say, these are the things that I appreciate, that these are the things I don't. These are the things that fit in with our school goals. Again, back up to that organizational dimension as far as setting up a proper learning environment. And various other points like that that help develop a more efficient relationship status in your classroom. Getting to know your students better operates on helping them learn or helping you learn and better understand their cognitive styles. If you get to know them through the work that they perform in the classroom or the conversations that you have outside of class about subject matter, or even and especially conversations about their personal lives, like what do they like to do? Sorry, it's my dog coming and saying hello, hi, go, bye-bye, go away, thank you. Okay, speaking of personal points here, no, go. Okay. But anyway, having those personal conversations about things that aren't necessarily related to schoolwork, it helps develop a relationship with the student that lets you learn what their learning style and their cognitive style is. Those students who better react and are far more interested in activity and being engaged, like physically, are going to respond really well to something like a gallery walk or a presentation or something where they're using their hands and building something, than those who are much more interested in like writing creatively or drawing or involved in maybe the school newspaper or debate club. It's just all about knowing your students personally and developing a response strategy to fit that. But positive interactions with your students always result in positive results in their motivation and their performance in your classroom. But like, yes, and relationships are important, of course. But at the same time, the question always rises where I'm not even sure where I'm going to put myself. Oh, wait. Right there is flawless. There we go. Okay. Yes, relationships are important, but it's also very difficult to explain how to do it. That's like when I had my student teachers ask me, well, what do you do? Like, how do you develop those important relationships that you have with your students? It's really difficult to say anything apart from, well, you just do it. But these are 5 tips that you can use to kind of help you build a more effective relationship with your students, build rapport, get to know them. And that's really core to anything that I advise any teacher that wants to build a better relationship with their students, is you have to be willing to learn more about them as people. You can't just think about them as like bodies in a seat or just numbers in a grade book or anything like that. You have to be willing to approach them as people and learn about them and really invest in their growth as people, because if you do that, they'll be far more willing to invest time in the topics that you try to bring them. My first tip for you is to be open and be real. And be available, because a lot of teachers really emphasize keeping that separation with their students, which I understand to a certain point, because you want to make sure that you are really emphasizing that you are a professional educator in a learning environment. But at the same time, it's not necessary to keep them completely away from you as if they were a different species or a completely different class of human beings. They're people that are learning from you, and they want to know that you're real, that you're open, and you're available for them to come to you with their interests and their problems. For instance, a number of different educators, primarily Martin, advocated that you should be presenting personal experiences as evidence and support for a topic in class. I very often pull from my own undergrad experience when it comes to writing about certain topics to explain to my students why my guidance on a given writing topic is very worthwhile. It's something that I heavily advocate for whenever I get to teaching about World War II. That's something I did a lot of my undergrad work on. Uh, he additionally suggests that, or well, Pierce suggests that lowering the barrier for bringing up conversation or controversial topics. Sorry, that's my cat. I should have closed my door. Oh well. But lowering the barrier for controversial topics pushes the student to see them as a guide, uh, and allows them to bring in opposing viewpoints that they might think the teacher wouldn't appreciate, because they view the teacher as someone who's going to help them progress that viewpoint, not someone who's going to shut them down and keep them from actually bringing up things that matter to them. Which brings me to my next point. Giving your students opportunities to express themselves and their interests and goals is the second key thing you need to do when you are trying to build rapport with them. One of the ways that I do it, I actually included here on on this video. I included one of my slides for a daily warm-up that I've actually really pushed in my department at my school. I call it the do now. I'm really mad that I didn't think of the right now, because it's a great pun, but another teacher already came up with it in another department. But the do now really emphasizes the students taking a prompt or something that you set up to get them interested and responding to it from a personal setting. So every other day except for Wednesday, I'll have like a journal prompt. For instance, yesterday's was, what do you think about cities? Where is one that you would really like to visit and go to? In my CP class, because we are talking about the development of cities and the Industrial Revolution. And I got a lot of information about kids who are really engaged and interested in cities. They want to learn more about them, how they work, where they develop, what they're there for, and what makes them different from other possible methods of living. And then my other students who are more interested, no, I want to be away from cities. I don't think they're very good. So it provides a little bit of insight into what your classroom dynamic is going to be about a certain topic. And it also gives you some insight into their own personal attitudes and goals. And then every Wednesday, I do a midweek reflection. I call it Wisdom Wednesdays, where we talk about a philosophical topic related to their own personal growth. If you give them opportunities to talk about themselves, they're going to be thousands of times more engaged in doing so. Another key method in this process is from Knowles Yanez, who actually advocates for using prying questions. If a student says something about a topic, just like gently push at them. Can you tell me more about that? I want to hear more about why you think that way. And that will usually bring them out and get them involved a little bit more. Number 3, the relationships with their teachers matter far more to students than many other things in the academic process. That's something that Supiano advocated for when he was talking about the mentorships that college students develop with their mentors teachers at the college level, which is something I can say a little bit about from my own personal experience, as my mentor at Pacific Union College was very, very key to inspiring me to become a history teacher, instead of just getting a degree and then going to grad school for physical science or something else. But building a relationship with your teachers is something that I have heard multiple times from kids that I've taught, that they value far more than anything I taught them about history. They remember the interactions they had with me about things we discussed outside of the classroom and the way that I interacted with them about their families, their goals, stuff like that, thousands of times more than they remember that I taught them about imperialism once. They remember some things, some of the really cool key activities that I do, they'll remember that. But more importantly, they remember the way that they had an adult relate with them and guide them and help them develop as a human being. Number 4, remove your biases. Be willing to hear their biases. This is kind of tough because a lot of people enter into any sort of educational discussion with like this preconceived notion. I have to make my points heard, and I'm not going to listen to other people's who are different than mine. This is something that is really contrary to any sort of like productive conversation, though, about a controversial topic or building a relationship with your students. Pierce actually said that it's impossible to develop a learning community unless you come at that community with, if not respect, at least curiosity and open-mindedness. Because if you're able to have those things, students are going to be much more willing to engage with you about something they don't know, something they're curious about, something they're confused about, or something they really disagree with. And you want to have disagreements because those can build productive growth both in you and in your students. And then number 5, care about them, respect them, and be positive with them about their learning processes. You really want to make sure that you are encouraging them and you are involving yourself in the things that they do and respecting them. There's a lot of different ways to do this. For instance, like those rules we talked about before with like your classroom management. Sometimes it's a better idea to just kind of go a little bit lax on the rule. One of the things I tell my student teachers is really pick your hills you want to die on. And a lot of times, if a kid really needs to go to the bathroom, your bathroom policy rule is probably one you should tweak a little bit because you want to preserve that relationship more than you want that kid to be in their seat exactly at the time you said they had to be, everything like that. Another facet of developing relationships and their importance in the classroom is found in looking up their needs and interests, developing those, and developing an understanding of those. Studies performed by Gardner, Sternberg, and others showed that many adult learners find themselves struggling to adapt their real world experience and practical intelligence to academia and vice versa. That's one of the main things that adult learners actually have to do pretty regularly, and even kids want to do it too. The high school students I teach, they're always looking, why do I need to know this? How is this going to help me in the future? Will I ever use this? And they're constantly trying to apply that existing knowledge into their real world experiences and then take the knowledge that they gained in the real world and apply that to academics as well. It's one of the largest developments in the human mind, especially in the generation that's coming up right now, not millennials, that's my generation, but Generation Z. They're very about their own personal experience, their own personal identity in regards to their real world jobs and careers and progress as much as they are with their academic learning. Assessing experience and providing appropriate levels of guidance for weaknesses helps educators and learners alike learn about their possible progress. So having a variety of interesting assessments that you can use for your classroom and to learn about your learners themselves is fundamental to developing an understanding of their goals and their needs. For instance, if you're trying to find out what your learner can do in regards to writing, you're not just going to simply assign them one essay prompt and then take that essay and then grade them and all of their progress for the entirety of a semester off that single piece of writing. No, that is not a good way of learning about what their actual progress in writing or their skill level in writing is. You have to make sure you provide multiple opportunities to do so. For instance, like my journal prompt writing. It's a great way to learn their comfort with writing and give them more practice. Some of the most effective methods for learning these goals are teacher learning, or question and answer sessions, wherein the teacher interviews the class and then provides opportunities for the class as a whole to elect a representative to provide interview questions for the teacher, thus breaking down a lot of those early barriers and those early doubts on what a class might be, solves that problem right and immediately, helps the teacher learn about what their students are looking for from them, and then helps the teacher learn about their student, or it helps the students learn more about their teacher's expectations, thus building that relationship and establishing those needs, goals, and interests. Question and answer sessions, like the ones I advocated for in my Daily Do Now a couple slides back, wherein you ask them a question, a quick question either at the beginning of class or the end, just to have them assess their own progress, and you can get some regular data on their own learning progress as well. And then the efficient use of office hours, such as providing effective usage of them, making them open, making them an opportunity to talk to students individually or even as groups sometimes about their progress in writing, anything they were confused about with the class, their critical questions they have regarding the course, either the way that it operates or something that's supposed to be learned from it. All of these methods can be ways to individually learn your students' needs, goals, and interests regarding their education. One of the most important facets about developing relationships, though, involves the potential disagreements you will have with the people that are learning from you. One of my favorite quotes regarding the respecting of opposing viewpoints and alternative thinking within your classroom is from Voltaire, one of my favorite people to teach about as a European history teacher. Obviously, I would love Voltaire. In that, Voltaire said, "I do not agree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to your death the right to say it." This is especially prevalent, I think, now in modern education and anything in our country presently. But a part of teaching really involves removing your own personal biases and your own disagreements with your students and encouraging them to think for themselves. And again, some best practices for these, I have 5 for you, involve those below. The first one is that every classroom member, including the teacher, must approach the class with a teacher-learner mentality. This is especially important if the teacher is a member of the majority and they're teaching a culturally diverse classroom. You have to be willing to learn about the students that you have in your room. Setting yourself up as this like monument to truth and knowledge and that you are unquestionable is a really great way to lose those students who can tell from the get-go you have no idea what their perspective is and anything that they're coming from. I teach in a very low income school to a lot of Hmong and native students, and it was pretty tough early on for me to understand their perspectives and their background. But I've really invested a lot of time in trying to learn more about those and incorporate their voices and their perspectives in my classroom as much as possible. Which brings me to number 2. You have to create productive opportunities for dialogue in your classroom, especially about controversial topics. Approaching these controversial topics can be kind of stressful because you don't entirely know what's going to happen. You don't know if something might turn hostile, something might turn aggressive. And so you want to try to develop an approach where you encourage every person, especially those people who have strong opinions, to come into the room with a learning mentality, a listening mentality, rather than I'm going to say what I think. You want them to come in and listen, and that usually will help them have an open opportunity for dialogue rather than just, here's my point, and I'm going to state it. Number 3, anticipate challenges, maintain a connection. This is Supiano again, a little bit indirectly because he advises understanding when your students are going to face challenges with testing, various other things. He insists that you have to maintain a connection by knowing what they're going to say, preparing an opportunity to not necessarily protect, but provide an atmosphere where they can say that opinion, and then encourage them to listen to others and enforce that structure of a listening environment rather than a telling and directing and hostile environment. The 4th piece of information here is that you have to make sure you emphasize challenging and questioning the assumptions and worldviews that your students hold before they come into your class. This builds heavily into transformative learning practices, actually, where you want your students to have a reflective understanding of the things that they're going through. You don't want your students to just leave your classroom with the same ideas that they entered with. That means that they didn't learn anything, they didn't challenge anything. So instead, you want to provide opportunities for them to challenge themselves, for them to take their existing worldviews and learn an alternative take on it, or at least develop them even more by confronting an existing problem and bringing it through it. That is core to culturally responsive pedagogy, especially for you as a teacher. You don't want to just look at something and go, no, I'm not going to bother learning about that. I don't have time. You want to approach your own worldview and conquer it in the event that it is not adequate. Finally, and this is a tip from Singhal and Gulati, you have to make sure that you keep culture king. You have to support student cultures and involve personal connections to them. This involves bringing in literature that comes from your students' diverse backgrounds, maintaining a connection with the family, incorporating narratives, especially in my classroom as I teach world history, incorporating narratives from the different groups involved in various events and various topics that you talk about. You cannot provide a singular perspective. You have to try to incorporate the perspectives of every culture and background within your classroom. And finally, we as Christian educators are brought to a higher calling to be culturally conscious and to, as it says in Matthew 5, verses 14 through 16, to be the light of the world. You must be a city set on a hill, and it cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. As Christ himself insisted, you cannot be a light in the world's darkness if you keep yourself in one single box and you don't allow yourself to grow and broaden and bring that light to other people. Christianity was not developed to be just the singular thing that stays in one box and just like kind of circulates around itself and keeps these same ideas alive. It was designed to, it was thought of to bring light and life to the world and bring those great qualities it has to other people, not just keeping it insular. Christian educators therefore have a mandate to improve the world and the lives of those that they teach, uh, both by improving themselves and trying to enhance the lives and perspectives of the people that enter their classrooms. One of my favorite quotes comes from Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor and a teacher in the Roman Empire. And he was a Stoic and a person who was very about personal growth and bringing as much light to what he called the common good as possible. One of his things that he said was, you have to remember to change course or accept correction, in that it leaves you just as free as you were before. Being wrong and not being culturally aware is not a death sentence. You always have an opportunity to learn more and correct your previous worldviews if you find something that was contrary to something you believed before. And when you learn those things, you have to remember to be welcoming and accepting, just as Christ was. You have to have an open mindset about opposing walks and views in life. You have to be willing to accept those people in conversations about race, sexuality, gender, various controversial topics that are going to enter your classroom. If you have a very specific and individual, and if you have a very specific, I'm so sorry. If you have a very specific point of view and are unwilling to adapt to it and bring out new points of view, you are going to be unable to be as welcoming and engaging as Christ himself was in his own teaching of his own followers. And above all else, we must teach and model the love and caring of that teacher that we represent by making a learning space safe and accommodating, and being culturally responsible and sensitive to the people that enter your classroom. Here are my sources for what I used today. These are also included on a Word document that is uploaded with this video. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I'm sorry I got a little wordy. I get a little bit passionate about these things. I hope you enjoyed what I had to teach you, and I hope that you got something out of it. Have a good day.